Okay, we're going to start. Welcome. My name is Jeffrey Snover. I'm a distinguished engineer and the lead architect for Windows Server. I'm very happy to have join us Andrew Mason, Principal Program Manager. And today we're going to talk to you about our new initiative we have around Windows Server 8 and how we want to get the GUIs off of Windows Server 8. So let's start with a little bit of history. Okay, so prior to Windows Server 2008, we always had GUIs on all the time, full GUIs, okay? That led to a number of problems, and so starting in 2008, we introduced Server Core, okay? Server Core then minimized, right, it was a small subset of the OS that you didn't run GUIs on. It minimized the servicing footprint, okay? So less code means fewer patches. Stay away from that, sorry. Oops. Less code means fewer patches, higher security by lowering the security attack surface. We've done a lot of work making Windows more and more secure, but there's just some metaphysics to it, right? If you turn off a machine, that's the most secure machine. Well, obviously, we don't want to turn off machines, but the other way you can make it secure is by not having the code that you don't need off the machine. If you need it, you need it. We're going to make it secure. But if you don't need it, we don't want it on the box, and therefore it's really secure because it's not there. Next is resource consumption, right? We want to minimize the resource consumption that we do in order to free up memory for you and your customers, okay? And minimize the deployment, right? As you move this software around, we want to have it to be as small as possible so that we can load this stuff as quickly as possible. This has actually worked out amazingly well, okay? So for Windows Server Core, you only have to, for critical patches are reduced by somewhere between 50 and 75% for Server Core. So this is really quite an advantage. However, that's for the people who are able to use it. The fact of the matter is that Server Core is not as popular as it should be, and there are a number of reasons for those, and we're addressing those reasons. So first and foremost, it was a one-time choice. You could install Server Core or you could install full server, and you better get it right because if you didn't, you got to start over from scratch. Okay? And so what people found was, okay, I start off with Server Core and I go and I'm using it and hey, that's great, patching less. And then something would happen and they'd say, oh, I got to install that. And the thing that they installed needed full server. And then they'd have to say, ugh, I'm just doomed. You know, I got to start over. I've got to reinstall from scratch, put full server on, get back to where I was, add that software and go. So it was sort of an all or nothing thing, too high. The risks of failure were high. Next was we had limited application compatibility. There were only so many roles that were on it, and a number of the important server products were not running on there. And perhaps sort of the real one that everybody got was the limited manageability. The first version of Server Core had command line only, that is say command.exe only, and we had a few command lines, but not a ton. Version 2, PowerShell was available. That was great as an optional component. And version 2 of PowerShell, you could do remote manageability, so that was great. And version 2 of PowerShell, however, we shipped with about 230 commandlets. So fact of the matter is quite a few people are successful in managing Server Core with PowerShell version 2, and that's been quite a big benefit. Now, starting with Windows 8, there really is just a transformation in Windows, right? The term of the day seems to be reimagining. Okay, it's a great word. That's actually sort of accurate. We really change how we think about who we are and what our mission is and what we're responsible for. So in the past, Windows Server was a great operating system for a server and its devices. In Windows Server 8, it's a great OS for lots of servers, the devices connecting those servers, whether they're physical or virtual, whether they're on-premise or off-premise. And this is what we mean by the phrase, Windows Server 8 is a best cloud operating system, right? There's an interesting thing. I don't know if you think about it. We had this kind of strange thing prior to Windows 8, right? I like to call it the Ethernet moat, right? It's just to say that if you take storage and you attach it to a server via SCSI cable, we would say, oh, that's our storage. We need to take responsibility for that. We need to manage that. But prior to Windows 8, if you attach that same storage via an Ethernet cable, it acted like a moat around server. And we said, well, no, that's not ours. That's somebody else's. Go talk to that vendor. And so the joke is that, it's not a joke. The reality is in Windows 8, we're filling in the moat. We're going to take responsibility for those devices as well. Okay? So we're going to take responsibility for lots of machines, lots of servers, and all the devices that are connected to those things. External storage arrays, networking, etc. Now, in order to do that, we really changes, we change who we are, changes what we're responsible for, and what we need to do in order to succeed. Yeah? Okay, so a cloud-optimized OS requires very low friction deployment, right? I need to be able to take the software and flow it like water. Wherever it needs to go, the right software and the right configuration. So it has to be very low configuration. And so that's why we have this model of just enough server, right? The idea is that you want to perform your function on a server, well then only the software necessary for you to perform that function should be on the server. Everything should be off. That minimizes the resource consumption, so you get maximal use of the hardware resources. It minimizes the security attack surface, so it's very secure. And it minimizes this serviceability footprint. Again, we don't have to patch it. Next is we need multi-machine automation, right? We need to be able to have lights-out automation through uniform remote management interfaces, and we want to have great GUIs, right? So you should not think, oh, Microsoft's server is against GUIs. We're not. We love them. We want to have the best managing GUIs anywhere. And you see that with our new server manager. I mean, I don't know if you saw it, but it's just gorgeous. We're investing heavily in GUIs. We just want them to run on client machines, not on server machines. Okay? So these rich client GUIs, hey, consume all the available CPUs, require a GPU, require 2 GPUs, whatever it takes to make the person efficient in managing their job. That's great. But those things should not compete for server resources. A server's there to do a server job. It's to perform a server workload, and we don't want to ever get in a position where we're saying, oh, don't really produce a great GUI because it'd be too heavy, it'd be too taxing on the server. No. Produce a great GUI, run it on the client, use uniform remote management to manage that server and then lots of others. So here's the bottom line. GUIs on servers are evil, okay? So, low friction deployment. There's a large amount of code required to support the GUI, right? We want to be able to make this as small as possible, fast, lightweight provisioning. The multi-machine automation, okay? So when you take a GUI and you put it on a server, our experience shows that the vast majority of the time, that admin GUI calls private APIs. Okay? When it calls private APIs, those APIs mean that you can't do remote management. And if you can't do remote management, you can't do multi-machine management. Okay? So that's one of the reasons why we want to get these GUIs off the server. Get it on the client, use that to use publicly documented formal management APIs so that you can do remote management. And if you can do that, then you can do multi-machine management. So you can see how if we allow GUIs to run on servers, then it breaks with who we want to be, right? With the mission that we've taken on. Back to that low friction deployment, I don't think I explained it well. Often these GUIs require lots and lots and lots of very large libraries. So if those very large libraries and GUIs are part of the OS image, and I got to move that around everywhere, that's just extra megabytes that are consuming resources, that are making it harder and harder to deploy things. Okay, we want those images to be tiny. And then, as I say, these modern managing GUIs, we want them to be very rich, and they do consume resources, resources that are better served for the machine itself. Now, there's this joke that says, what the large print giveth, the small print taketh away, right, in contracts. So this is actually the opposite, right? What the large print taketh away, the small print giveth. So let's be clear. Not all GUIs on servers are evil. We're talking about admin GUIs on servers are evil, okay? Servers have a role as a terminal services device. Terminal services device, you put applications which have rich GUIs on them, and they're served up to multiple clients via VDI or via terminal server sessions. That's great. We love that. That's a big business for us. In that business, you see us going to more specialized hardware where we're saying, hey, your server should have a set of GPUs in order to satisfy the needs of modern Metro-style GUIs. So that application, that model is valid and viable, but it requires specialized software. The other thing is we're talking about things like GUIs running on, an HTML GUI. That's fine too. If you want to put a management GUI that does that from a server, that's fine. They're relatively low footprint. Still, we want you to do formal management because you want to have multi-machine management. But in general, we want to get the admin GUIs off the server.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and good afternoon, everyone. To support these changes that Jeffrey's talking about, we obviously had to make some changes in the product. And so I'm going to talk about some of those and do a short demo to show some of those differences and then talk some about application compatibility in this environment. So the Windows Server 8 deployment options, we have full server with the UI, much as we had in Server 2008 R2, and that's for backwards compatibility. So that gives you all the capabilities to run your apps locally, to run terminal services, as Jeffrey mentioned. Then we have Server Core as the preferred deployment option. So we've made some enhancements there that I'll talk about in a little more detail. RSAT, the remote server administration tools allow you to remotely manage your server core boxes. You saw earlier, if you were in the Windows Server session, Jeffrey demonstrated Server Manager Plus. So it allows you to manage more remotely and deploy roles remotely. You don't have to do things from the command line like you once had to. And then the new option is to deploy full server without the GUI shell. So what this does is removes Explorer and Internet Explorer off the box. So you still have MMC and Server Manager to allow you to run some of your management GUIs locally if you need to as you transition away to those running remote. But the functionality is still there. Provides many of the benefits of Server Core without some of the disadvantages and allows you to transition over to Server Core and to running your GUIs remotely, as we'll see. And then the other change we've made is you can now transition between Server Core and full server by installing and uninstalling a set of features. So if you deploy Server Core and realize that you need something that's only available in full server with or without the shell, you can add those features back in and move up to full server without having to reinstall the box. Same thing with full server. You can start out with full server, use your tools, your GUI tools locally if that's what's required to do some of your initial configuration, then uninstall that functionality and convert down to a Server Core box and get the advantages, the smaller footprint and the reduced servicing. So again, Server Core is the preferred deployment option in Windows Server 8, and we'll see some of the reasons why here. So we've really made a bunch of changes. We've listened to the feedback on some of the deficiencies in Server Core and really made a bunch of changes around management, deployment flexibility, as well as ease of use. So on the manageability side, as Jeffrey mentioned, there was no PowerShell in the first version. PowerShell was added in R2, but again, it had a subset of commandlets. So there was less available than you might need to take advantage of the full environment of Server Core. And there was no remote install or configuration of roles and features. With Windows 8, PowerShell now has nearly 2,500 commandlets. There are commandlets for networking and things that you had to use some very old command line tools that did not have great syntax for. You can now do through PowerShell. And then you do have remote installation of roles and features. So the Server Manager GUI is available for that. There's PowerShell commandlets from Server Manager, and there's also now DISM commandlets. So you can use those to remotely add and remove roles and features. Role support, we started out with 8 roles in Server 2008. R2 added a couple more roles, and now in Windows Server 8, we now have 13 roles. So we've added remote access server, all of Active Directory certificate services, and Active Directory rights management services. So those are all available on Server Core now. And SQL Server has also announced with their Denali release that they'll be supporting Server Core. Then flexibility. As I mentioned already, that before you had to install either Server Core or full server. If something changed in your environment and you needed to change the deployment option that server was running, the only option you had was to reinstall. Now you can move in between them, and you can even do that remotely using Server Manager and the commandlets. So the configuration states are Server Core is the preferred option. So it's similar to Server 2008 R2 Server Core with the enhancements I just talked about. You have full server with the graphical shell for backwards compatibility. And then for this transition between those, we now have full server with the ability to uninstall the graphical shell. We're referring to that as the minimal server interface. So it looks very much like Server Core when you first bring it up, but it does have some other capabilities under it. You can start MMC, you can start Server Manager as you transition into this remote management environment.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for that is that IE, we love it, but honestly, it's one of the things that has one of the components that gets patched more frequently, as is the shell. And again, what we just did was we took a look at the things that consumed resources and were the less critical to the core role of a server, and these two things popped as things we could take off and get that nice balance between full server and Server Core.
Right. So the big difference on full server without the graphical shell installed is you still have all the additional functionality of full server. So apps that may have required more than Server Core, not necessarily GUI or IE, can still run in this environment and get some of the benefits of not having those particular things installed. So transitioning between Server Core and full server, as I mentioned, this can be done PowerShell. The DISM command line tool is still there, but you can see for disabling and converting down to Server Core, there's one package you uninstall, Server Core-full server. That will remove all the dependencies above it and convert your box into Server Core. To reinstall, there's three things you would add back: Server Core full server, the GUI shell, and then the GUI management tools. And so you can do that either with PowerShell commandlets or with DISM. Now, reducing on-disk footprint, one of the changes we made in Windows Server 8 is we've also created this functionality called Features on Demand. And what you can do when you uninstall something is there's now a -remove and a /remove switch, depending on if you're using PowerShell or DISM. And what that does is it actually deletes the binaries out of the side-by-side store. So it will free up the disk space. So when you transition down to Server Core, you can do the -remove, and it will remove all the full server binaries. So you shrink down to that minimal Server Core footprint.
I really said not many people. Not everybody understands the side-by-side and how server installation or component installation works. So it's worth explaining that.
So the side-by-side store is a folder on your hard drive, and you'll notice in Server 2008 and 2008 R2, when you go to add a role or feature, you're never prompted for the media or anything. That's because all the binaries live in that side-by-side store. So when it goes to install a role, it just pulls the binaries out of there and hard links them into the System32 folder. So if you have 1,000 VMs out there and you're never going to run Active Directory, you have 1,000 copies of Active Directory on all your virtual machines. With this -remove and /remove, you can delete those, shrinking your VM sizes significantly. And one of the things, I don't know, everybody got shiny slates last night, so did anybody try out the Server 8 preview bits at all? Everybody's playing with their shiny new toys. That's what I figured. But first time you run setup, once you get a chance to do that for server, you'll notice there's now 3 options during setup. There's full server, there's Server Core, and then there's something called full server features on demand. Basically what that is during the process of building Server 8, we actually run the /remove and remove everything from the side-by-side store. So that is optimized for virtual machine deployments. Basically when you install, you just get full server. None of the roles or features are there. What you have to do is use the source -source or /source, point to a WIM. You can do it on a DVD, on a file share, or you can also use Windows Update and then install the role remotely. So rather than having the 17 or 18 roles and the 40 or so features sitting there on your hard disk or on your virtual machines, none of them are there. You can just pull down just the ones you're going to run on that particular server. And we're working on some final tuning of it, but it looks like we'll be able to save about 2 gigabytes worth of disk space on an install.
So you can see why this is an important feature.
Right.
Now also this Server Manager running on a client can now do remote installation, graphical installation and configuration of roles. And we'll show you, but you can actually, as you go and you do that, you can say, get the features on demand from this location. So we should show them that.
Okay. I don't have an image that way, so we'll see if the
Maybe
dialogue
I'll show
comes
you
up.
that.
Maybe
Okay.
you'll show it. So, administrators will really want to take advantage of this because they'll be able to minimize the disk space. So, going down and removing the shell in IE doesn't necessarily save a lot of disk space. It does save a little bit, but it does reduce the patching, as Jeffrey mentioned. So the optional server graphical shell, the minimal server interface, this uninstalls Explorer.exe and Internet Explorer and its associated files. As I mentioned, you can still run Server Manager and MMC. There's also still a subset of the control panels, so some of those are still available. And really what this does, it enables developers to begin shifting towards server core and remote management. So this is sort of this in-between state that allows you to start removing your shell dependencies, ensure you have full remote management. You still can run things locally if you need to in this transition period, and it's aligned with the server future. So this is the direction we're going. We really want those things off of there unless you're running terminals or remote desktop services. And as I mentioned, there's patching involved in these things. So it enhances the availability, reduces the resources consumed. I mean, the shell does take some resources, even if nobody's logged into the box. And so uninstalling the graphical shell is very similar to transitioning between server core or working with any other feature or role. So Server Manager in the Features UI, it's available there. You can uncheck it and reboot the system, and you'll be running without the GUI shell. You can also use the commandlets to uninstall it or DISM. And so, again, remotely, you can add and remove this as well. So I will switch over to a demo here. If I press the right button.
This is the new optimized server UI. It's black.
Oh, I might have to. See what that does. It was working just a minute ago.
It's looking pretty good to me.
Are you getting a signal at all? Laptop one, laptop one.
Yep. Okay, that's the demo machine. What's your theory of operation here? Yeah, come on up. Bear with us just 1 minute. While he's working that, do you have any questions, any comments? Yes, sir. Great.
Yeah, it's still multi-mom. Duplicate the displays.
Mappy, yep.
What resolution?
Uh-huh.
This was the same resolution. I can bump it down if we think that's going
Okay.
to make a difference.
Mm.
One.
Yep.
I mean, it wasn't working.
What resolution?
Uh-huh.
You can go back to 12.
Wait, so the question was, will you blow up? Why would you blow up? Like, were you saying?
Is there another cable I can try?
Yes. Got it. That's correct. And so that for that to work, for Outlook, if you required Outlook to get its DLLs, you'd have to run in the full server environment. You can roll back, but then those functions won't work. You'll want to uninstall those functions. And we're actually going to talk about some of that, some of the things, when something doesn't work, what that will look like, and how you can determine that. But certainly this idea of getting on refactoring the system. We call it making a composable server. That's something, frankly, Andrew and Bill Lang, the vice president of server, the two of those guys started that a number of years ago, and it's just been gathering steam over and over, more and more each year, and then we will be rolling that out as, you see now SQL is supporting server core, so more and more of that will occur. Individual components, I can't tell you what their roadmap
Working
is.
right before we started.
This guy, I don't know.
That's 3 now, yeah.
The new Server Manager version 1 is not extensible. We're only talking about Windows Server 8, but certainly we understand the requirement. Yeah. Hey, from the side of the room? Yes, ma'am. Yes, so the question was backward compatibility. When Windows Server 8 runs in full server mode, will the previous application still run on it? Yes, and if that's not the case, you tell me. Yes, sir. Do you want to try and TS into that box? That's the other thing. Get an Ethernet cable. You can steal this one if you want. Oh, here's one.
Here's one.
And then use the demo box to TS into it. Sorry about that. Will the GUI disappear? Again, we only talk about, I can tell you what our overall vision is, and I can tell you what we're doing in this next release. Honestly, we don't talk about the future releases just because we'll go through a formal planning process. But that's why, honestly, that's why I like to explain the motivations, right? Have you ever heard the joke about the two guys in the woods and a bear's going to come and attack them and eat them, and they're going to take a run for it, and the one guy stops and he pulls off his pack and he starts to put on a pair of running shoes, and his buddy says, "Jeffrey, I don't know what you think you're doing. That's a grizzly bear. It can run 35 miles an hour. There's no way you can outrun it even if you have running shoes." And he says, "Well, Paul, I don't need to outrun the bear. I just need to outrun you," right? And that's my favorite joke because in the business context, because what it does is it says, unless you understand why someone's doing something, their actions can seem bizarre. And so that's why we started this talk with our motivations, right? If you understand my motivations, you can predict what I'll do next, and I don't have to tell you. And I can't tell you, and I won't tell you because we haven't gone through the formal planning process. And when we do, and that'll be the next PDC for that next OS, we'll be very precise about what's done. But you see our motivation, and it's not just, well, we don't like GUIs. There are concrete business requirements that we're trying to achieve, and running GUIs on a server are in conflict with that. Did that answer your question? Yeah, okay, great. Wait, let me miss Tim, and then we'll come back to you, sorry. I'm sorry, could you say again? Oh, user-supplied roles? Yeah. I like that idea. But that is not supported in this release. Sorry. Yeah, so when you get your server bits and you install them, the Metro interface will be running on server. Oh, the desktop experience. Yeah. No, the desktop experience, nope. And when you install full server, you will get, there is only one server UI. There is only one Windows UI. And that new Windows UI is Metro. And of course, we didn't really show it so much. Well, I guess we did. Yeah, he did. Showed there isn't a way to get from Metro to the classic desktop. But yes, there is only one experience. When you install full server, you'll get that Metro experience, the existing desktop experience, the desktop experience is things like ink support and what are some other things? Voice recognition?
Voice recognition, media player, the media
fonts.
Foundation piece, the fonts, some of the tablet interface, like the tablet keyboard and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's freaking out here. I'm rebooting it. Why don't we continue on with the slides, and maybe we can do the demo at the end?
Yeah, great. Sounds great. Actually, you know what? I can show them something. I'll show them that
Features on demand.
features on demand. Maybe. Let's see if that works. Is it like me? Control P.
This was displaying right before we started.
It did.
I switched right back and forth.
And
to make sure it
had
wasn't
we
pink.
invited you all up on stage, you could have looked over his shoulder and seen it. No, it doesn't like that. Okay, we're going to bring out the hand puppets in a minute here.
We are.
Okay.
Well, yeah, why don't we continue on and while my laptop reboots and see if we can't get this going at the end. So the next section of slides talks about a deep dive on application compatibility, and I heard while I was mucking about with my laptop some questions about that. And so what we actually did was we have a group in Microsoft and the Windows team that does application compatibility testing. So every time we have a new release, they do a bunch of testing of popular apps out there to see how they work on the new OS and see if we do some application compatibility shims or work with the ISV to fix up things. But we had them do a set of testing on server 8 with the shell uninstalled to see what the results would be. And things that worked on server core obviously worked in that environment. But as we expected, we did find some applications and things that had some dependencies. And mainly they were on IE and help.
Yep.
And we even found some of those in the installers. So one of the things we did try was, okay, well, let's start with full server with the GUI shell, run setup, let setup finish, then uninstall it and see if the app works. And for the most part, even those that could not complete setup with the shell uninstalled were able to run in the minimal shell environment because they did not have the dependencies for their services to start up. Now, some of their GUI tools and things still did have dependencies on IE and help, but if you were to move those off onto the client and make them installable only remotely, things would be fine.
I find it interesting that a problem with video is causing a talk on server so much difficulty, right?
Yes.
I mean, it sort of makes the point, right? Now, in this case, conveying the information is essential. The video drivers is essential to conveying the information. But other than that, video is not really critical to the mission of a server. So to have the video, it's the revenge. The machine knows what we're talking about.
See, you said it was evil. It doesn't like that. So the next few slides talk about some of the issues that we commonly found with things. So if you don't have it installed, as I said, you don't have Explorer and the system tray and the taskbar and things like that. And the common issues that we found there were around shell namespace extension APIs. So if you're using a namespace to display data or calling into one of the control panels that is implemented as a namespace, that does not work, as well as common dialog boxes. Then Internet Explorer was really more about checking the version as well as help, because help requires MS HTML, which would be gone with Internet Explorer uninstalled.
Yeah, and on the system tray, if you have a server application that's popping up toast, please stop. That's...
And most of these things, especially the namespace extensions and the common dialog boxes, are things that really only affect tools. Like Jeffrey just said, most of your server services should not be doing things with those and trying to pop dialogues.
But you think that's crazy. We found them. We have.
Yes. So common dialog box limits are really around the networking, and that's because the networking control panel is implemented as a shell namespace extension. And so some of this does require explorer.exe to display it properly. So if networking is not a key scenario in your tool, it may work fine on there. The dialog box does display fine. It's only if you click on the networking option down in the scroll area. Now, one thing you can do is you can pass in an old style hook and tell it not to do OFN_explorer, and what you'll get is an old style dialog box. What it actually is the Windows 95 common dialog box for open and save as, and that works fine. Yeah. Now, in that, if you've already mapped a network drive, NetUse or whatever, or use a UNC path, that will work. So it is still possible to save things and retrieve things from the network. And the sample code there is basically a sample that you could use and will force you down to the Windows 95 dialog box.
And we keep that, we have a bunch of code in this talk, and you shouldn't be trying to write it down furiously. We have it there so that you can pick up these slides and when you're at home and get them from there.
And at the very end of the slide deck, there is a slide that we won't show, but it does list all the DLLs that are uninstalled as part of uninstalling the shell on server. So you can go look and see if you have dependencies on any of those. So grab the slides afterwards and you'll have that data available. As I mentioned, any UI with dependencies on the shell namespace extensions, chances are you won't have these other than in your tools. The most common is for popping up one of the control panel apps that's implemented as a shell namespace extension. So the firewall application, the network application, and Windows Update are all that way. So those are not available on server with the shell uninstalled. You'll have to use either the command line tools remotely or the PowerShell commandlets for those things. Then Internet Explorer, as I said, is not available, so there are some very common things.
Do you want to talk to this? You want me to talk to this and while you work on that?
If you want to, I can see if
you.
I can get this alive.
I really want to show you the demo because it's one of those things, you can hear it, but if you see it, it's like, I get it. I mean, what you're going to see is basically you'd be able to, from the environment without the shell, you can still get PowerShell, you can get command.exe, you can then launch MMC, you can launch Server Manager, you can launch all these GUI things, but you don't have the start menu, etc. So that's what we want to show you. Anyway, so IE, so when it's not available, right, so when you take away the graphical server shell, IE is unavailable. So when you call this API, that returns, it's silent? Or silently fails or returns an error?
Actually, these will likely return an error. And the first one, IE launch URL, is if you want to open something in a browser. So chances are, again, that's a tools-only kind of thing, as well as the other ones on the second bullet point, where if you're trying to display HTML text in like a pane or something within your environment. Now, MMC does support HTML panes, and has actually been modified such that it converts those and will give you an error when you try and display those.
Exactly. So that's an example of the right thing to do. So if you have an application, you'll see we'll talk about this in more detail, but basically you wanted to detect the state of the server and then modify your code according to that. And so now we'll show you later how to detect whether or not you're in server core, full server, or server core, full server minus the graphical server shell. And you can also query the version of IE, and of course gracefully fail. So this, in fact, shows you both the key and the name in that key that you want to check. And if it's there, the key, blah, 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 Internet Explorer, if it has a value version, that has a value, it's installed. And if it's not there, then it's not installed. And you just need to fail gracefully. It's not present. We also don't have system help. Okay, so what that means is, you want to check and modify your help options and buttons, and that's part of the demo. So you check which environment you're in, and then say, hey, if help's not available, just either gray it out, or make it go away, or if someone clicks it, replace the help with a dialog box saying, to get the help, it's unavailable in this environment, to get it, install full server. Anything else I missed on this one?
No, I think if you flip to the next one. So in a lot of cases in the GUIs that we tried out, when you click on help, and you may see this some in server core and like Notepad and things, when you click on help, nothing happens. So it silently fails on its own, but it doesn't even tell the user or the administrator that the reason it's not working is because the shell is not there. So as an example, if I can get the demo working, and MMC has been modified in Server Manager as well to come up and tell you this isn't available since you don't have the shell installed, go do this on another computer or install the shell if you really need to access it locally. So very common one is when you try and use the help OCX, it tries to check the IE version. Because IE is not there, it will fail. Help tabs will sometimes disappear if you're using a tab dialog box. And again, because it's checking the IE version, IE frame's not there, and also if you're trying to use the Visual Studio help dexplore.exe, it will fail as well. So none of the help's going to be functional without the shell. That's something that will have to be installed on a client system or something online that they can go view from a client system.
Do you want to try it?
Let me make sure the other one's up and running first.
Okay.
You want to go on to the next slide just for a second?
Sure. Okay, so here are the series of best practices for dealing with this. The ideal solution, of course, is to run just on server core, right? Have no dependencies on full server or graphical shell. If you run a native code, use the lowest level of Win32 APIs available. If you manage code, then you limit that to the set of APIs that are supported on server core, and then modify your test environment so that you're always testing and running on server core. And then for your remote management, really the goal there is to support PowerShell and or WMI. In the talk that comes immediately after this, I'll be showing you how we have a new way to write WMI providers. They are about an order of magnitude easier than writing a WMI v1 provider. And I'll show you how you can code them a particular way, and you get both a WMI provider and a set of PowerShell commandlets for free when you write it the correct way. And this is, in fact, why we have so many commandlets in Windows Server 8. It's because we had this new way to write these providers, and it's so simple to do. That's why the manageability is just gorgeous.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to distract your thought there.
Let me finish it. And so you write those providers, and then you do remote management and automation, and you write your GUI using the great new environments on a client to manage it.
Okay, so I have two VMs running on here. This one is running full server, essentially the equivalent of Server 2008 R2 after setup. And I'm going to import the server manager commandlets. And then do get Windows feature to get the list of roles and features available on the box. And you can see right here we have the server graphical shell, and it has a little X there, meaning it's installed. And so we have the start menu, the system tray, and all of that. And then what I'm going to do is remove Windows feature, GUI-shell, tell it to restart. Now because these are running locally on my laptop, that's going to take a few minutes, so I'm going to slide this over and let it chug a bit. And over here, I have with it already uninstalled. So you can see there's no start button or Windows flag there. There's no system tray. There's no taskbar. Looks very much like Server Core, except Server Manager is up and running here. So I will start up PowerShell, module, Server Manager. Get Windows feature. And we'll see down here in the list, Server Graphical Shell is uninstalled. But I do still have Server Manager, and we can see it's all functional. If I go back over here, let me go ahead and fire up MMC. MMC comes up. I can do add, remove, snap-in like I would on any server box today. There's all my snap-ins available.
Do you still have Alt-Tab and things like that to switch between menus?
You still have Alt-Tab and all that, yes, to switch between them.
But Windows Tab, where you get that 3D,
yeah, that's not going to happen, no. So computer management loaded. I can go into Event Viewer, look at the local event logs if I wanted to. I can go into Device Manager. And then one of the things that is somewhat difficult to do on Server Core today, because Device Manager is read-only, is I can go into Properties for Network Devices, and I can get some of these advanced settings. So I don't have to use a command line tool from the network vendor or modify the registry manually to try and set some of these advanced settings. I can do that all locally. I can go into Services. I can manage my services locally here. And then, like I said about help, So if I try and pull up the help topics, you'll see it comes up and tells me the GUI shell has been disabled. Some features are not available, such as help. You need to install the GUI shell if you really want this locally, or run it somewhere else. And now Server Manager works the same way. If I try and go to like the Server Manager forums, it would have tried to open an IE window, but it's been modified to say because the GUI shell's been disabled, there's no internet or browser, so I can't take you there. And if I go into Manage, this is a single server in this case, but I can go ahead and pick my one box. I get the list of roles. If I go under Features, I can then, without having to remember how to type it all in, check it and have it install the server GUI again for me if I need it.
And then once you use this to show the features on demand.
It's going to be
Yeah, right here.
right here.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see this, but on the left, it says you got two things at the bottom. On the left is export this as a configuration file, so you can use the GUI to figure out what you want on something, store it as a configuration file, and then you can automate that. I showed that in the Server Manager keynote demo. But to the right of this is...
specify an alternate source path,
yes.
which brings up this dialog box here, which tells you basically you may not have all the role files and services available locally. If you want to, you can specify a path to go install those from remotely. Now, there is also a group policy setting for this particular path, so you could use group policy to specify how all your servers, where they'll go, so you don't have to go through this process every time, or even specify the source on the command line. If the group policy exists, DISM and the PowerShell command list will respect that and go pull from whatever location that might be.
Oh, looks like your installation worked.
Yes, and my uninstall worked, so if I go over
this
here,
had full server on it.
if I type the password correctly,
Now we're dealing with an earlier release, so it did not have, you asked about the Metro style, it did not have the Metro style. The Metro style was one of the big surprises for the show, so all the early versions didn't have it. By default, it will be there.
yes. And so you'll see, just like in Server Core, you get a command prompt, but because I did not tell Server Manager to stop launching on startup every time, Server Manager starts by default as well.
Yep.
So I could leave that configuration, have a command prompt for things I want to do from the command line or via PowerShell, as well as Server Manager available to start using various GUI tools.
But no,
Right, you can see
no toolbar.
the start menu, system tray, all that is gone. I've removed IE.
You will
Yeah.
no longer get friend updates on your server front page when you.
Right. Explorer doesn't exist. If I go to Program Files, Internet Explorer, and try and run iExplore, doesn't recognize it. It's gone. So,
There you go.
yeah.
Great. So, thank you for putting up with the technical difficulties.
Yeah.
We really did want you to see that.
Yes, so over here I could go, I'll just use DISM
Great
here.
question.
I'm just going to use DISM because it's, well, I figured it was going to be faster, but. So one thing you'll notice when this does come up, here we go. So you'll see some things are enabled, but if we go in here, I forgot to. I can go in here and remove server core dash full server, and then it will convert down to, and it may have been off the top. Hang on.
Go ahead and do that, and then we'll switch to some slides, and we'll show you it when it's done. But yes, so the question was, hey, having gone from full server to this state where I don't have the Metro style, I'm not going to see friend updates, not going to know what my weather is from my server, you can still run GUI tools. You can run MMC, you can run things. From this environment, you can now go all the way down to server core, where you don't have Server Manager, you don't have MMC, you don't have those things, and then you can go all the way back up again. So he's going to do that while I finish out the slides.
So right here you can see server core full server is enabled. I will disable that and let it reboot, and we can switch back to it. But the other thing that I want to point out, since I noticed it in here, is the features on demand. What it will show up as is, yes, the items will show up as disabled with payload removed. That means the binaries have been deleted from the local image, and you have to specify a source to install those. Now, by default, .NET 3.5 is that way, but there are some shims in there, so when you try and install apps, and same in client, where we'll automatically pull it down from Windows Update for you.
Sweet, 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 sweet.
So I will let you.
Great. So I talked to you about best practice, get running on server core. Now, an interim is if you have some stuff that you're not able to fully make that transition. Okay. Then what we want you to do is to detect when you're running on server core, and make sure you run run in server core, or if you be able to run in this environment that does not have the full shell and IE. So detect you're in that state, and then modify your application to respond correctly, as we showed you in the demo, where the help menu, you clicked on it, it detected what state it was in and gave up a dialog box saying unavailable in this environment. And then if you do have functionality that requires full server, then our guidance to you is to make that an optional component and allow people to install it without it, and then optionally put it on. So this shows you how to detect the state of the graphical user shell. There's a particular registry key there, and we have a couple values: core server, server GUI management, and server GUI shell. Server core is always set. Okay? Server GUI management is set, if server GUI management is 1 and server GUI shell is set, that is the server, the minimal server interface. And I screwed that up, didn't I? If they're both set, you got full server, and if only one's set, you're in between. That's how you do it. Okay. And then we have a set of, you can tell these things, the other thing you can do is to use the DISM APIs to look for particular things being installed and uninstalled. So you can look for these packages, and the code to do that is here. Leave that there for your perusal after the talk. And this is how you troubleshoot your existing code. So if you're running your code and you have a problem, you're testing it and you encounter a problem, step number 1, see if you have the same problem on full server. If you do, then it has nothing to do with this. If you don't, then you want to do the next step. It's probably because something you depend upon is missing. Okay, so now the trick is to figure out how to tell what's missing. If you take a look at the sys internal tools, there's something called Process Monitor. It's a great tool. You run that, focus in on your process. It'll tell you all the things that you're loading and trying to load, what registry key values you're looking for. And then, again, we have a list. We'll publish, it's in the back of the deck, but we'll publish it more formally, of all the DLLs that are missing. So if you take a look at all the DLLs you're trying to load with Process Monitor, and it's in that list, that's your problem. So you want to see where you're loading it and why you're loading it and modify that code. Next, we've got, as part of the SDK, we've got a tool called dumpbin. Dumpbin does a static analysis and will dump dumpbin/dependency will go and list the static dependencies that you do. We can also use it to get the APIs that you get from each one of those dependencies. And often what we find is that someone will depend upon, what we found a number of times is that server products will be calling into a high-level DLL, and we're looking why, and the answer is, oh, well, there's there's just one API. It's really not a graphical environment, but there's one API, and it turned out that API was up there in the high level. Now, honestly, due to the tireless work of Andrew and his team, we've been refactoring those DLLs so more and more of them are available in lower environments. But if you find that indeed your server application's calling something real high and it's just one API, you might look for an alternate API that's available lower level in the system.
Right, and the other thing there is, in the early days of server core, we found a lot of management agents and tools and things were calling and checking to see what version of IE was there, so they were querying that in the registry. And it turns out the reason they were doing that was pretty much a legacy check. They were trying to see if the version of IE was there that would install XML. Well, XML has been in the OS for a while, so there was really no need to make that call anymore. So just removing that one check, everything worked fine.
And then here's a link to a nice blog entry for how to debug load library failures, a couple tools, G-flags, and you run G-flags on your executable, go through. This is the first tool helps you with your static dependencies. We examine it, know what you're calling. But your code can say things like, load library, some string, and we don't know what that string is. So this tool helps you debug those things. You run your code, you walk it through its paces, and then you run WinDebug against that, and it'll show you that list of information. And the blog will explain how to do that. So our call to action here is to get with the program. Windows Server is becoming a cloud-optimized operating system with Windows 8. And want you to participate in that. We don't want you to say, hey, this is where Microsoft is, and when you go to sell a customer, you tell them, hey, you have to go run this compatibility environment to run my application. That's really not the best experience for you or our customers. So modify your apps and drivers to install and run on Server Core. Don't install your GUI tools by default. Make them optional, or preferably make them available on the client only. Attend our next talk, where you'll learn how to write these great WMI providers and PowerShell commandlets or PowerShell commandlets to get this great remote manageability. We think you ought to participate in this cloud vision as well, so that you can, sell lots more of your stuff. Why sell one copy when you could sell 7 or 10 or 100, right? Figure out a way to make it be valuable and to lower the cost for the customers to consume multiple copies of your software. And then what we're doing in the new Server Manager, that entire thing is entirely layered on top of PowerShell and WMI. And what this does is now that is a very thin layer on top of the core platform, and that does two things. One is it ensures everything you can do from the GUI, you can actually automate as well. And the second thing is, if you ever decide you need to rehost it, you don't have any of that business logic in the GUI. So rehosting it becomes very easy to do. And then profile and understand the dependencies of your application. With that, is it ready to show?
Almost there.
Okay. So again, to reset the context, we had gone from full server, removed one component to get down to min server.
The minimal server interface.
Thank you. New name. I'll remember it shortly.
Marketing got a hold of it.
That's perfect. And now we're converting that to Server Core. And then the next step would be to remove the side-by-side,
right,
and then
shrink the image down.
Then you wouldn't even be able to find it. So we can take some questions. Yes, sir.
So,
we had
that conversation last night. So setup still requires a minimum of 512 megabytes. But the memory footprint, you'll have more available. Now, we're still sort of in the preview phase, so a lot of the performance enhancements and tweaking and stuff hasn't happened yet, so I don't have any hard numbers.
But the official statement is that server requires 512 megabytes, and then as we use less and less, it makes more and more available.
For your app
but
test.
If you're like in a test environment or you want to run a bunch of demos on this, you'll find that after you install it, you can reduce the amount of memory in an unsupported way, and it'll work probably just fine for you. Yes, sir. Is it a requirement for? Oh, the certification and logo?
So the logo's not finalized yet. We are going to put the shell in there and change the wording on the server core requirement. So how that gets finalized is still being worked out.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Actually, do you mind using the microphone? Because then I don't have to repeat it. Sorry.
So we might have an application run as a command line, run as administrator mode. So in a normal full UI case, you have a pop-up and ask for user possible and all that.
Yep.
In the server call console, how that happen? Do I have to?
Yeah, UAC. I guess we don't have UAC turned on.
UAC has always been disabled in server core. It's not part of server core. We did the same thing in server. When you uninstall the shell, it uninstalled UAC as part of that, so you don't get those pop-ups because there's no way to right-click and start a command prompt as administrator. And the part of the reason, and the reason the security guys are okay with that, is there's no Internet Explorer. There's no way to go download malware and do bad things on the system.
Does it mean that it doesn't exist, the run as administrator mode kind of thing in the server call installation?
Well, you can still do run as and specify different credentials. So you could run as in a different administrator account, but the need to elevate to run something is not there.
So everything always runs with an elevated token.
Everything, yes.
Run as in command line.
Yeah, if you want to run it with a different credentials than what you're logged on locally with, yes.
Just to make sure you understood that. So in regular, like in the client, you run with decreased privileges, and then you have to make an explicit action to get the elevated token to perform admin privileges. In these environments, we're assuming that if anyone's touching the machine, they're an admin. No user should be touching the machine. Therefore, we don't do that. All the processes run elevated. And he was pointing out, if you're running elevated as you, but to perform some action, you need to perform it as someone else. You can use the run as command, and PowerShell has a number of commandlets where you can pass in a different alternate set of credentials.
Right, run as lets you specify a different username and password. So if you're logged in locally, but it needs to run as administrator X, you could tell it, run this as administrator X for me.
And you succeeded.
And I succeeded. So I've rebooted this particular virtual machine, and you'll see that it is now running server core. If I try and run MMC, it's no longer available. Server manager is no longer available either. And one of the changes we've also made in server core in Windows Server 8 is PowerShell is installed by default now. It is optional, so you can't uninstall it if you want to get a really small footprint, don't have a need for it. Jeffrey's going to shoot me for saying that.
No, absolutely. If
it is there by default.
If you don't need managed code, you can take that off. Right. You do lose a number of the commandlets. We got this big uptick in commandlets. Huge number of those are available via WMI. So you can take PowerShell off and still do remote management when you run the PowerShell commandlet. Can I show them?
Sure, go for it.
So let's see. Can you actually see this?
Switch over to this one?
Sure.
In
let's
PowerShell,
see.
since it's bigger font.
Isn't that?
It's not in PowerShell yet. And I mentioned earlier, in the past on server core, you used to have to use NetSH from the command line to manage your networking settings and things. It's kind of been around for a while. It doesn't have the best syntax. It's very difficult to manage a lot of things. You also can't manage bindings. So if you need to change binding orders and things like that, there was no way to do that without modifying the registry on server core. Well, in Windows Server 8, there's a new set of networking commandlets. It has all the same functionality as NetSH, but it does also have the ability to manage bindings. So that's one of the advantages of keeping PowerShell there. Use those new networking commandlets, and it will make things much easier to administer.
So this is the getNetAdapter commandlet. And the nice thing about that is it's written as one of these SIM commandlets. And with the SIM commandlet, so if you just say getNetAdapter, it gets you that information locally. If you say getNetAdapter and say SIM session and you say machine name, then what we will do is we will go and talk WMI to that remote machine, invoke their provider, and you get exactly the same functionality on that local machine running the commandlet here. Concretely, PowerShell does not have to be running on that remote machine. It can be a server core machine where you've taken off managed code, you want it to be the absolute smallest footprint. This command will still work. Now, not all of the 2,300 PowerShell commandlets will work that way, but a very large number of them will. So it's really quite a pretty great thing. I think we're out of time. We'll be around here for a little bit if you have some more questions. But we're changing the face of server, and we want you to join us in this bold new path to the cloud.
And we'll both be Ask the Experts tomorrow night. So if we don't get to any questions afterwards here and you want to come visit us, we're happy to answer questions there as well.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.